The Exodus story, the whole kit and caboodle of it is fairly good literature. It's got drama and emotion happening in it. It even has some character development, which you don't typically see all that much of in biblical stories. And if you read the footnotes or are fluent in Hebrew, it has puns. Today's reading from Hebrew Scriptures has one of those puns. Amalira explained today's lesson comes from the middle of the Exodus story. The Hebrews were wandering the desert, starting to moan about how hungry they were, and God responds to their need by providing them with quail and manna, the flaky substance they harvest in the morning. The Hebrew that gets translated when they look at this stuff in the desert, and they say, "What is it?" That Hebrew that gets translated, "What is it?" is the word manna. So it gets called, what is it? I've eaten some of my own cooking and thought, what is it? Yes, my food should be called manna. Not because it is a gift from God to sustain me, but because it is of questionable help. The point of the story, of course, is not just that God provides the sustaining gift. Not the pun is not the point of the story. But one of the subtleties of the story that I don't remember noticing before until this week on Monday at the Monday morning Bible study, 11:30 to 12:30 on Mondays. So we're talking about the scripture, and the Hebrews were instructed to take up a specific amount of manna, an omer, which is 3 quarts-ish, something like that. They're told to collect 3 quarts, an omer of manna each morning, and no matter how much any of them gathers, they all have an omer. Now you can interpret that to mean that God works some magic each morning as they're out there collecting their manna, or you could interpret it to mean that while some people collected more than an omer and some people collected less than an omer, those who collected more made sure that those who collected less had enough for their daily bread. And I prefer that second explanation, the explanation that says that everyone can have enough if no one has too much and we share. But this isn't the part of the Exodus reading that connects most directly with our gospel lesson. The part that connects with the gospel reading is the part about the issue of storing the manna for tomorrow. Though God provided the manna each day, some people worried that God might not provide the manna tomorrow. And so they didn't eat all of their manna. They saved some for tomorrow. And the next day they found that it had gone fetid and foul and was not edible. In the parable, Jesus tells us about the rich landowner who has so big a harvest that he can't store it all, and so he decides to knock down his barns and build bigger storage units. Unfortunately, he gets hit by a bus on the way home from the architect's office and dies. Jesus calls him a fool because he thinks he can live off of that bumper crop for the rest of his life. Jesus calls him a fool because he thinks he has a rest of his life and that is guaranteed. I hear this parable and I squirm. Yes, when there's a landowner in one of Jesus' parables, you can bet that there's some commentary being made about the oppressive, predatory lending practices of the economy of Jesus' day. That's how landowners got rich. So I can try to push this parable away from me because I'm not rich like that. But we've been reading the story next to the manna story. A story about God providing for our needs no matter our economic status. A story about how wasteful it is to store up for tomorrow when God provides. And that's a tough thing to hear and believe when I get told by FEMA I should have my earthquake kit ready, and I should have my go bag in the closet by my door, if I had a closet by my door, but I should have my go bag ready to grab in case there's a wildfire and I have to evacuate, and that my family should have a communication and reunification plan, and everybody should know what that is. And my financial planner advises me that I need to save more money for my retirement, and I look at what's happening with healthcare costs spiraling out of control, and Jesus and Moses tell me not to store up excess for tomorrow. I'm happy to point to the uber rich. That's safe to do. I'm not uber rich. I'm not going to become uber rich. I'm happy to point to today's equivalent of the landowners of Jesus' day, to point to the people who become rich through unethical or plain old mean behavior. I'm happy to point to them and say, that's too much. And it probably is too much. Here's some truth. There's some truth in this meme. If a man has a house stacked to the ceiling with newspapers, we call him crazy. If a woman has a trailer house full of cats, we call her nuts. When people pathologically hoard so much cash that they impoverish others, we put them on the cover of Fortune magazine and call them role models. As true as the statements in this meme might be, the stories that we read today are about me too. They have some truth for me as well. I know that I have more stuff than I need. I notice that every time I dust, so twice a year or so. Now, I notice it more often than that. I bought some new wristbands for my Fitbit and put one of them on, and it wore out, and I could not find the bag of the other wristbands, and I knew I had them somewhere in my house, and I ended up ordering another wristband, and as soon as it arrived, I have too much stuff. And I can attest to less truly being more. I can attest that simpler is nicer, simpler is calmer, simpler is less stressful. One of the wonderful things about being at my dad's cabin in New Hampshire while I was on vacation in August was that there's no cable, no television, no internet, not even a T-Mobile signal. I was unplugged. Growing up, we didn't even have a landline. My dad and stepmom added a landline when they turned 60, and though I resisted at the moment because it was technology encroaching on that little bubble of wilderness, I'm glad they have it now. It's a safety thing. But being plugged in is stressful. It's also wonderful. I mean, I really love being connected to my families and friends. And I got family across the country, across the world. I've got family that I'm connected to, friends. I got a friend in New Zealand who I would never talk to if it weren't for Facebook. And it's wonderful to be in touch. And it's stressful because I read things like that the Chinese government are starting to crack down even more on Muslims, and I don't know what to do with that information. So I wonder if turning off Facebook and Twitter would make my life simpler and less stressful. Yes, I'd need to find other ways to be in touch with family and friends and then actually follow through on them, and I'd need to get over my FMS, the fear of missing something, which is a similar disease to FOMO, the fear of missing out. I'd have to become okay with missing clever memes like the one that I shared today about hoarder billionaires. The problem is I would also miss out on articles like one that introduced me to a new word, a word that's new to me, the word is a couple of years old, that I think totally relates to today's scripture. The new word is reducitarian. It's a term coined by Brian Cateman, who, when he coined it, was an energetic New Yorker who spent years advocating for recycling and composting and other environmental friendly practices before realizing that reducing his meat consumption was the single most important thing that he could do to address climate change. And so he made the shift to veganism. However, that's easier said than done, and try as his best, he still would sometimes end up eating turkey or bacon, and his family or friends would criticize him, "Aren't you supposed to be a vegetarian?" And while Cateman knew that he was making progress in his meat reduction journey, he resented the focus on perfection that made the slightest transgression feel like a failure. And that's when he came up with this word. He wasn't a vegetarian, he was a reducitarian. A description that's affirmative and inclusive and celebratory of all people making good progress towards the reduction of animal products that they consume. And I think the term can be expanded to be used to refer to anyone making their lives more sustainable. There are 4 basic tenets of reducitarianism. I like that word too. According to treehugger.com, 4 basic tenets of reducitarianism. It's not all or nothing, which for me is a good thing. I don't think I could become a vegetarian, let alone a vegan. But I could become a reducitarian. Incremental change is worthy. I found it impossible to not use single-use plastics during Lent last spring. It was just impossible. So I'm working on making an incremental change on reducing my use of single-use plastics. Reducitarian. In the same way, if I were to start celebrating Meatless Mondays, that's a reducitarian worthy change. The third tenet is that all motivations matter. It really doesn't matter whether it's an environmental concern or an ethical concern or a health concern or even a money-saving concern that makes you want to live more sustainably. If you're acting on that motivation, it's good. And the fourth tenet is that we're all on the same team. We can't let small differences of opinion or motivation or interpretation get in the way of the larger goals. We need to make sure we don't eat our own. Which brings me to the final point of the sermon today. God calls us to radical trust in these scriptures. God calls us to radical trust, and while I'm going to update my earthquake kit, and I'm going to continue to save for retirement, I'm not going to put my trust in my earthquake kit or in my saving for retirement. I trust belongs to God, and I find God is made manifest in community. So I'm going to trust community. We're all on the same team. When the big earthquake comes, no matter how good our earthquake kits are, we are going to need each other. When a health crisis comes, I'm going to need community. Likewise, my efforts to live more sustainably and simply will be easier if we work together, if we support each other like teammates. Which points back to the overarching theme of this season of creation sermon series, which is walking together. If we're going to protect the land and water, if we're going to protect biodiversity, if we're going to address the climate crisis, if we're going to live more simply and sustainably, we need to walk together. We need each other. So here is your homework assignment. Update your earthquake kit. And if you don't have one, make one. Check in with yourself about where you're putting your trust. And celebrate the we that we have when we walk together. Amen.